Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Talking with Teal. I'm Ryan Nakata, and today I'm here with David Long. So, David, how you doing, brother?
Doing well, brother. How's your day?
Great, great. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for being here, and I can't wait to jump in and talk about all your YouTube work and what you're starting with the integral movement that you're building and community on Facebook and everything. So, yeah, thanks so much for being here. And to start, I thought you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and your life and how you eventually got into integral theory.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be amongst your other guests. Um, let's see. It's kind of hard to know how to start and summarize something like "Tell me about your life." Um,
Yeah,
uh,
sure.
I don't know. I consider myself to be an artist and a philosopher. I feel like those roots go back to my childhood. I feel like a lot of people end up who they are because of all the little things that have happened to them through their whole life. And the universe has just kind of dealt me a particular hand to make me into the person I am today. It's hard to say. I don't know. Like there's there's so much. Um, I got into philosophy when I was in my teens, and I started out as a Christian, and I eventually was able to deconstruct my religion. I was definitely a dedicated follower, so I did a lot of research into Christianity to try to do work to deconstruct it. And I think it was actually probably through Christianity that also had an influence on me to seek out the truth, like with ideas like seek and you shall find, and um, some of these verses. I don't feel like, at least not my understanding of Christianity, wasn't just have faith and believe. It was like a more rational kind of approach to Christianity, at least the way that it was introduced to me. Like there was good reasons and evidence to believe. And so in looking into that a bit more, it was kind of easy to start to deconstruct it, since I didn't have the faith as a boundary, or like because I was also raised in the church. It wasn't like my conversion was propping up my life change or something like that. So um, after deconstructing Christianity, I got into Buddhism and deeper into philosophy, and I wanted to study worldviews. Um, then I kind of, had an existential awakening, and um, deconstructed the self and learned from a whole bunch of cool teachers and green and stuff like that. And I was even doing some teaching and some guruing myself for a little while there. Had a handful of students, and it's strange how it happened. It kind of just happened around me. I didn't really try to make it happen. I'm just kind of a vocal person, I guess. um, and I was really excited and ready to try and start a mystery school for a while. I thought maybe that was the thing to do to help, people who are 20 somethings and having an existential awakening, and they need some kind of guidance to go through that, I think. And a lot of the people who are guiding the way aren't really guiding the way to something realistic necessarily. They might be guiding the way into just another superstition or something. So that was something I was really interested in until I came across integral theory. And that's when I kind of like, I was at a point where I was like ready to go out into the world and be a teacher, but then I decided to actually go back into the cave and be a student for like another 10 years and figure out what's going on with this integral stuff. um so yeah, when I first got into integral, I was a huge fan of Ken Wilber. I was a huge fan of Joseph Campbell before that. I feel like he was really the first taste of an integral approach to comparative mythology that I got. I heard Wilber say that he sort of cut his teeth on Campbell, and that's where things like the pre-trans distinction come from. He's kind of taking Campbell's idea about literal versus metaphorical truth and turning it into a developmental distinction, pre and trans rational, pre and trans the rational stage. So there for a while, I was like hearing Wilber talk about I amness before the Big Bang and stuff like this, and like it was hard to tell whether he was talking about it poetically or if he was speaking about his personal interpretation of his experience, or if he was like making claims about how the nature of reality actually works in a literal way. And as I started studying his theory more in depth and like putting the pieces together and understanding it from a more like holistic kind of perspective and learning his methodologies and things like that, I started to have doubts about some of his fundamental assumptions, and kind of thinking that he sort of breaks some of his rules and betrays some of his standards to integrate his own bias. So now I'm kind of to a point where I've started my own version of Integral, you know, still respecting the Integral project and all the Integral distinctions, but trying to take it forward and do it right. Because I know there's a lot of people in the Integral movement who have a lot of different views, and I think it would be a lot better if we found a skillful way to work and build and refine together than to have a sort of cult of personality type of approach where one dude is the guy who knows it all and the rest of us just follow along. Especially moving forward, because we know that we probably won't have Ken for too much longer. So we really have to figure out how to take up this project and do it ourselves, do it together. So that's been something I've been really interested in lately, that and like trying to refine at the cutting edge and help build the community up a little bit and stuff like that. So I don't know how much of a summary that is, but that's something.
Yeah, that great job. I mean, giving a condensed summary of your life in a little 5-minute window. It's super interesting to hear about everything that you kind of went through and things that you had studied and how it kind of came together in Integral. So let's jump right in, and I want to hear about what you're trying to start. I don't what you call it's like the revolutionary with the E.
Yeah,
Like evolutionary.
Integral Emergentist revolutionary movement. So basically, I'm interested in an integral movement, and for a minute, I actually tried to start an integral community of the adequate, because that's some of the terminology that we use. But then I started doing that, and I kind of was thinking about, okay, we're going to be creating these future systems together. We are going to be, and if we really need to get it right, that's going to be super important. So if we're going to build something like an integral version of religion together, it can't be that you have a leader that tries to reduce all the mountaintops into just one tradition. Be it Steve McIntosh trying to say that, oh, there's a Christian God, who loves us all, or Wilber's idea that, oh, it's, all this is arising in consciousness, and Buddhist creation myths are true. So like, we need to have a skillful overarching approach to the integration of religious traditions. And I think Joseph Campbell is really good at doing that. Like I said, he was one of the teachers that I originally, I got my original integral perspective from. And I think that a lot of what Wilber taught me built up on top of that. And I actually think that Wilber, in terms of his theory, he gets a lot of it right. It's just that he ends up breaking some of his own rules in terms of methodology. And we can get into that a little bit later, but I want to make these the integral emergentist revolutionary movement distinctions. So eventually what I kind of discovered is that there are these different branches within integral, and there are different integralists who think different things. And when it comes to things like, do you swing more to like a translation versus transformative kind of approach, like be it to politics or economics or something like that? It's making a distinction like, we're actually interested in transformation, not just translation. So that's the revolutionary movement part. And the reason the R is small in revolutionary and the E is big is because it's an emphasis on a growing up type of revolution as opposed to the sort of violent revolutions. But a lot of people in the integral community aren't really that interested in a transformative new system. They're interested in creating hacks into the old system, like conscious capitalism or conscious consumerism or something like that, where it's like, the idea is if I have an integral business, then that's gonna, I don't know, fix capitalism, somehow make it work. Or if I'm like a conscious consumer, does that make capitalism work? No. So I think we need some kind of a major revolutionary change at this point in history. And the emergentist part is like, that seems to be the more truthful and realistic ontological and cosmological perspective that's in line with integral theory and integral methodology. As far as I'm concerned, I mean, I make this case. I know a lot of integralists disagree. I actually think this is probably the main controversy in the integral community, is that some people are more realists and some people are more idealists, which is just a distinction around primacy of. So it's like the idea is, and a lot of people, because a lot of people are confused about this. This isn't really something we talk a lot about explicitly. But the question is like, is consciousness nested in the material reality? That's realism, or emergentism, like consciousness as the emergent property of matter, or is reality arising in consciousness? So that's the idea, or that's the distinction. And I think that evolution doesn't prove that God doesn't exist, but it does kind of prove that the Christian story about God is wrong. And emergentism doesn't prove that the Buddhist, or that God doesn't exist, but it does kind of prove the Buddhist idea of consciousness all the way down and back to be wrong. And so I actually see a lot of parallels between the kinds of arguments that fundamentalist Christians make and the kind of arguments that these fundamentalist Buddhists make. And when you compare the two, like, they're pretty much the exact same reasoning and problems in reasoning. But if you bring these things up, people who are Buddhist, who, they're more like, how could you compare? They have this kind of attitude like, how could you compare what we're talking about to fundamentalist Christianity? It's like, well, they appeal to personal experience too. And they have a community of the adequate who agree with them. And they're going to say that anybody who doesn't agree with them is just an immature rebel or something like that. And they're going to make God of the gaps arguments and poo-poo science and not understand the circular reasoning in which they're translating their experience. Like, oh, I'm in a church and people are telling me that God is speaking to me right now, and this and this. And it's like, so of course they understand their experience in that kind of context. And it's the same thing in Buddhism. They're told to go into this is what you do. You go into this state, and this is what it means, and this is how to translate it. They get to that state. They go, I achieved it. Now I'm enlightened. But they're still caught up in cultural conditioning. They haven't really deconstructed and reconstructed that tradition. They're just appealing to authority and taking people's words for it. And if you listen, when Ken Wilber talks about this stuff, he says things like traditions maintain, as if that's good evidence for these things. But yeah, so these are my concerns. It's more of a focus on a translation, a revolutionary movement, an active attempt to try to help humanity grow up, and a fair, reasonable, overarching approach to the integration of religion and intellectual honesty and integrity when it comes to the kinds of claims that we make about reality, and can we actually back them up, or are we overstepping our bounds?
Yeah, great. Wow, there's a lot of points we could jump into from here. So I wanted to go back a little bit and just run something by you to see how this is aligning with what you're saying. I was talking to a
Yeah.
friend the other day about how perhaps the integral movement, the mainstream integral movement, may be a little bit too conservative in its kind of envisioning of a future Teal or second tier kind of reality or social structure or whatever. And it kind of, to me, what you were saying kind of sounded like this revolutionary movement kind of paints a picture that we really need something completely new instead of just trying to make our current systems a little bit better at work, right? We need a complete transformation. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yes. Although I've written a paper called something about like a real integral version of politics or something like that, integral politics, including both translation and transformation. So I actually think that we can and should do both. I think that we should work to do better within the current systems as they are, but we do also need something like you're saying that's totally new and revolutionary. I think that capitalism and our current economic system is like, it's going down like the Titanic, and all of these political things that we're doing right now, they're shifting around the deck chairs on the Titanic. They're dealing with a lot of the symptoms, but none of the problems. Like I really like Chang and the Chang gang stuff, like and his ideas about universal basic income. And I think that could help. Maybe it could buy capitalism another 10 or 20 years, but it's still going down. And it doesn't address capitalism's main problem, which is a might makes right decision-making process at its foundation. It's either top-down legislation of taste, or it's bottom-up mob rule. And neither one of those is going to get you justice, So that's a major problem. Until
Yeah.
we fix that, like, I mean, honestly, like the I would say the main goal of our movement is not to create a integral world, like in terms of teaching everybody integral or anything like that. Like the goal is an integral decision making process, because I think if we can get that right, then we can get everything else right. We can have a way of processing the tensions from everywhere. We need to create a real open, transparent, refinable, democratic process that is open to science and tests. And this is again where I'm saying, like, it has to come back to, we have to prove everything. If you want to establish it, you have to prove it, which is why, this idea of just claiming idealism and not being able to back it up is not going to work. We need to have, if you're going to go in and say, okay, this is our religious tradition, and you're going to basically kind of impose that or set that up on, and technically impose it on future generations, you better get it right. And it can't just be based on your own bias and preference. It's got to be fair and reasonable. And like, you can't just favor your own, so the tradition that you like. You have to create something that's fair and reasonable for everyone. And that's one of the main problems. That's why I got away from the just blanket kind of, hey, you're integral, come in and be a part of this, to the integral emergentist revolutionary movement, because those distinctions of emergentism and the revolutionary movement focuses in on what the project is actually about, and who's qualified to act, who's really qualified to be in the community of the adequate to be able to realize this.
Yeah, great, great. I love what you said about trying to develop some kind of integrally informed decision-making system. I mean, that really just gets to the heart of like pretty much everything, right? And if we can figure that one thing out, it's kind of like everything can kind of fall in line from there. So, do you have any
Right, then we
idea what?
won't, yeah, then
Like,
we won't need individual leaders at that point. As I mean, we still will, but they won't be like the decision maker, you know what I mean?
right.
The process will decide, and so you won't be able to have that kind of one person ruling over the whole kind of thing. Like, the reason why people are interested in what I'm doing is because I don't claim to know everything, and because I don't think that I have the answers. Like, the only answers that I think, I mean, I have a minimum amount of answers. People like some of my ideas, but it's not because I'm a great philosopher, or because, you know, I know everything. It's because I know my weaknesses, and I'm humble enough to be able to be like, you know what, if we had an open, transparent, skillful process that we process tensions from everywhere, we could actually come up with the best solution together.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. Do you have an idea of what this decision-making process would look like? And like, what have you tried that has been successful? And I guess a question that like comes up for a lot of people too is how do we distinguish that from like a green kind of sloppy, ineffective decision-making process where you can bog down and never come to any decisions? So, do you have
Yeah,
any idea what that
that's
looks like?
yeah, that's a great question. We've actually, when I say we, I mean integralists. We've actually developed several different governance systems, like Holab, or oh, sorry, I'm combining them, Holacracy and Colab. When I was in a integral group in Vermont for like a year or two, I worked with Cecile Green, who um, she's the one who like came up with and runs Colab, which is basically like a version of Holacracy with a little bit more nuance to it. But basically, the idea is that you're processing tensions. And so instead of having this idea of like, oh, friction is bad, let's avoid friction, it's like, no, let's go into the friction. This is a chance for us to potentially um, get upgrades, because if someone is sensing a tension, that might be an opportunity for us to grow or include something or do better, to be able to make more people comfortable, or to address things more skillfully, or whatever it might be. And the way this basically works is there are rounds that a tension is run through, and basically the rounds are designed to avoid all the problems that you would get into in a normal argument about these things. Like, each round has its own purpose, and the idea is to process these tensions quickly and get something actionable on the other side. So you go through these different rounds, and then on the other side, you either create a role for some, or for someone to be able to do something. Or you decide, okay, well, we're going to test this, and then when the tests come in, we're going to know, and we're going to refine it better. But the good thing about this process is that it's always open to be refined and changed more as we go. It's not like this is the final word on this or something like that. So it's actually kind of a lot like combining democracy and science, like the scientific method, where we have open, transparent peer review and the ability to refine over time with new data. And I mean, if you think about that, like bringing the human conversation online, making it into something objective that can be mapped, and we can continue to engage with it, and we can establish what's been debunked and move on. You know what I mean? For example, Bruce Alderman and I are going to have a debate coming up, and we're going to try out this new method of debate where we basically make objective maps of our arguments with all the different points. And when I say objective, I mean like something, that's an object that you can like look at, and it's like it exists. It's like, here, look at this map. This is a map of the logic of the points that I'm going to run through, right? And we're going to go through these kinds of rounds. And basically the idea is, round one will be like we present our ideas. Round two will be like clarifying questions about the ideas. Round three will be a chance for us to address the particular points, in the other person's argument. You'd be like, okay, this point number 2 right here, this is the problem I see with that. And then, we could draw a line off of that and make a note about that problem. And at the end of the debate, we'll be able to see what points stand and what points don't. And if I or if he defeats an argument, that's going to be on the record. That argument was defeated. Now, maybe somebody else could come up and take up that argument and do a good job of addressing those issues. But now we can actually start to make a physical map of our arguments and the points and the different subpoints and the different arguments against and all that kind of stuff. Like, I imagine that we could do this with all the questions and the issues of humanity and put it on a computer and map it out and start to engage with it, which doesn't mean that the computer figures it out, but the computer is a tool to help us to be able to map it. A lot of people think that in the future that computers are just going to be able to automatically solve our problems. I don't think that's going to be true for everything, but they're definitely going to help us to be able to work on our problems together a lot more skillfully and include a lot more voices, like starting to crowdsource our problems and come up with real solutions. I think you would actually see a huge upsurge in evolutionary refinement in a culture like that aligned themselves with like real democracy. Democracy is not voting. Democracy is the people ruling. And instead of voting for a representative or voting on this or that, like now we can actually bring the human conversation online and engage with all of it. And I think that actually is going to be the future of democracy, is something much more like that, like an open, transparent process that can take good ideas from anywhere, and any good idea that proves itself to be good. You could get that from a 5-year-old kid or from a person at almost any stage of development. So I think it's really the kind of transcending and including integral process that we all know would start to bring real justice to the world.
Yeah, I love it, man. I mean, that everything you said is completely aligned with what I've been thinking about, and also kind of gets to some of the amendments that we're making in the integral community. And it sounds like what you're really emphasizing, right, is this kind of collaborative, open sourced, anti-fragile tinkering and prototyping, and eventually scaling these models and trying them out, running them through the mill, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and having a very structured process of getting to these good conclusions. And is your debate with Bruce on the integral stage?
It's going to be on the integral stage. We're still working out the details and trying to figure out time. Bruce is a very busy man. So yeah, that's going to be happening soon though. I'm really excited about it because I actually think that it's kind of a revolution in debates too, like trying to apply this method, like you said before, like all throughout history, kind of up until this point, it's kind of been like, well, who do you think won? I don't know. Maybe it's up to you. Maybe that, you know what I mean? It's like all up in the air and considered to be totally subjective. But at the end of this kind of debate, we're going to get to see what points stand and what points don't. And that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'm so excited to watch that. And this kind of gets to something else I want to ask you about too, was, just me going about talking to more and more integralists. And one of the themes I picked up on was a kind of a frustration. And I was talking to Bruce Alderman about this, that it seems like a lot of the mainstream integralists like Wilber and other people, they don't really go out and debate people. And I know you've talked about this too. And it's like, someone was saying that perhaps the gravitation towards people like a Peterson or even like Sam Harris or other IDW figures is their just not shying away from a good debate or fight, and getting their stuff out there, getting criticized, getting hammered, but just standing for what you believe in. And I'm really passionate about this, like you are, about getting this stuff out there and being representatives or even ambassadors for this kind of knowledge. And I just want to ask you, like, why do you think, like, first of all, do you agree with what I'm saying? And why do you think there's been kind of like this stagnation, kind of insulation in the integral community that people have been frustrated with?
Yeah, I think it's a complex problem. I think a lot of the problem has to do with who Integral has been selling stuff to. Like, I think that they've been trying to figure out how to sell stuff and market stuff to be a sustainable, legit business, to even like make their stuff viable. And so what they've kind of done is they've sold a lot of stuff to the New Age movement, and they hang out with a lot of very spiritually mysticy kinds of dudes, and around a lot of that kind of environment is a very culty kind of vibe. I mean, like, a lot of the people who Wilber has put himself around are like cult leaders, and like he himself says that he's not a guru. He says he's a pandit or whatever. He's more of a philosopher than a spiritual teacher, but he does have a cult of personality around him. And I think also, as he's, like, and another reason why he hasn't really got out there too much is because he thinks that as an idealist, he thinks the world is an illusion. So like, he has this one thing I've heard him say before, and I've shared clips of it in videos, where he's like, if you're in a dream and people are starving, there's two ways you can help them. You can feed them in the dream, or you can just wake up, and that will end their suffering immediately. And it's like, that's like a total disconnect from reality, man. Like, what are you talking about? Like, there are real people suffering, and just because you close your eyes and go to some state of emptiness doesn't stop their suffering. Like, the world needs us. So I think he's kind of, his Buddhist ideology has kind of, in some ways helped him to think it's okay to bypass a responsibility to take these ideas into the world and make them better. And so I think, it's a combination of these factors. It's money, it's the groups, it's his philosophy. And I think also, as he's getting older, he wants to protect his legacy. I think if he goes and he tries to have a debate with somebody who disagrees with him, he runs the chance of potentially making himself look bad in public and making it seem like these other views are legitimate when he's so used to strawmanning them and dismissing them. So I think he's just playing out the clock at this point, to be honest with you. He's interested in preserving his legacy more than I think he's really interested in how these ideas can help the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point about the whole business aspect and the marketing aspect too. And I think that I never thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense. One of the ideas that I've always had, that I thought could really play a part in testing and refining and prototyping these ideas, was just to start an integral political campaign and just run for office. And then that's like the ultimate test to see if it worked or didn't work, right? And you would use this model to try to target voters and have a message that people could relate to and resonate with. And then if it didn't work and you lost by, a million votes or whatever, then you can go back to the drawing board and try again in a couple of years.
Yeah,
And
I
kind
think
of,
we should do both. And I think, the Integral Emergentist revolutionary movement and that leader, they should collaborate, and we should try to meet in the middle and synthesize. Like if he could, I honestly though, I do think that because our decision-making process is so broken, like I don't think that you can really fix the system from within unless somehow from within you can fundamentally change the way that it works. Like that's almost why I think that they kind of need to work together, because we can prove that the methods work over here and demonstrate that, and also put pressure on capitalism from within it. Like if you started to have this kind of, so I should probably take a step back and say that I'm working on this book called The Long View, which is about the stages of an unfolding revolutionary movement, right? So there's different values and goals at each stage of a movement, like, so for example, like right now, what I'm trying to do is build a core of leaders and establish that. Then I think some of the next stages are things like having local meetups and like maybe even getting a community center. In Boulder, they got up to about that stage. Stage 3, like where they had the community center. Maybe the next stage would be something like an integral community, where we got off the grid together and we started building our own culture and we started making like the microcosm of it. And then once we get that somewhat firm, then we could figure out a way to start to integrate in people from the outside and start to buy up more businesses in the community and replace the old system as it starts to go down with more integral businesses. And you could use, assuming we don't get universal basic income, actually like right now would be a great time. If we had our stuff together, we could easily point to Trump and be like, look, the system's broken. Come join us. Are you tired of worrying if you're going to make it week to week? Come live with us. We'll make sure that you have everything that you need. And, we'll have some kind of a basic agreement where you work a certain amount of hours or something, some kind of a contract like that, where you're definitely going to be taken care of. You're going to have a place to live, you're going to have food, all that. So I think like, even if you just provided the bare minimum and like you integrated people and started putting them to work, like people's lives could be the revolution. Like where you work, where you live, where you put your money, like the system in which you live, like are you within these off the grid integral systems, or are you participating in the old school systems? Just changing where you live and changing where you work could be the revolution. So that makes it practical for everyone. And there's also a pressure on capitalism to change. So that's at a certain stage of development of this movement. But I think if we could get it working on that stage, our on that level, our integral methods, and figure out scalability, that's going to be one of the challenges with this kind of a decision-making process, is like, how does it work on this, like the local scale and the next scale and the next scale, and how do you both harmonize with overarching standards and local variations or whatever. So there's going to be a lot of problems that we're going to have to figure out and refine over time. But I do think we have a pretty viable revolution. The question is, it's like a problem of like, it's nothing, it's no one, and then it's everyone. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's like you really have to have your ducks in a row if you're, by the time you get to that point to where you're able to integrate in a flood of people, if that happens,
Yeah.
right? So being patient, taking our time, really doing it right, it's going to be the real challenge to do all that hard work and to involve people up until that point where it is just the tipping point.
Mm.
um, Maybe I got a little bit off topic.
No, not at
uh,
all. This is actually a topic I'm really passionate about, and I love your vision, man. And you know, Sri Aurobindo's community, Auroville in India.
I know of I know of Aurobindo.
He has a community in the Pondicherry, India called Auroville, and it has like over 1,000 people. They have their own currency and everything. I
Wow.
was like, well, why, maybe we can learn something from them and create Tealville or whatever, and then
Yeah.
have multiple communities like in a network. I think that'd be like the ideal.
Yeah.
And I lived in a spiritual community called Ananda, and they have communities all over the world, all over the U.S. And this is something I want to get your thought on. One of the things I'm kind of new to the integral community. I've only really been part of it since last year, and I've met a lot of integral people who like locally, like in Portland, where they're kind of like casual Wilber readers, and they're like, "Oh, this is kind of interesting. Maybe I'll go check it out and talk about consciousness or whatever." But they're
Yeah.
not as passionate or committed as like people like us. And I was that's something to me where I was like, I guess to sort of actual like residential community, people need to be like pretty damn committed to the movement. And I haven't been around a lot of integral people, honestly, but like I haven't seen that level of commitment compared to like a religious organization that probably has advantages of not being integral, right? Kind of like being blue, it's pretty easy to just be all in.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on like how to either like make it more viable for people who are semi-interested, or even to get people who are like all in like us?
Yeah. That's a complicated question because to some extent, we probably need to realize that within the current system, the way things are set up, it's going to be really hard for most people to get to integral. It takes a lot of work and a lot of, I mean, like, I really think that it legit took me like at least 5 years to really understand it and to really, like, I mean, you get the basics and it starts to pay off immediately, right? Like if you just get like the surface level of quadrants, right? You can be like, oh, I need to take into account all four quadrants. And like now you got a checklist. You know what I mean? That's helpful immediately without even knowing about like integral methodological pluralism or zones or, like the way it applies to epistemology or, any of that kind of stuff. Like you can get value out of the surface level understandings of it, and it keeps giving more value as you dig into it deeper. I think maybe a way that we can start to get people into it is to try and make it more like young and fun and cool.
Mm.
Like that's kind of what I've been trying to do. I sort of see myself as like the integral youth pastor a little bit.
I love it.
Yeah, so that's basically what I'm trying to do. I definitely want to find other people who are on this kind of same page and who are trying to intentionally appeal to more younger 20 somethings. And I mean, like, and so many people in our community are old white dudes, like we need, I'm talking to a couple ladies in my group and I'm going to try to like get them to start a female leadership group. And part of what I think their mission is going to be is to figure out how to get more lady integralists involved. I think that's an important project. I think trying to talk to the youth and show them, like the 20 somethings, talk to Green, see if we can make something that's more palatable, less boring. I think like so much philosophy is boring and academic. And my experience with philosophy is not like that. Like my experience with philosophy, like I'm not like an academic philosopher. my best friend is a bit of an academic philosopher, and my experience of philosophy is more like hanging out one-on-one with him and like talking about things that I'm passionate about or that I'm interested in, and having like my mind continually blown, you know, being like I really do think there's such thing as like a mindgasm, like when this idea and this idea and this idea all come together, and now you feel like you have some new way of understanding all of it that makes more sense. Like you're like, oh it's like I just realized all these things. It's like different islands coming together to create one in your mind. And I think I got addicted to that. Like there was a point in my life where it was just like, you know, especially after deconstructing Christianity and coming out of that, it's like coming out of a cult, realizing that the world is totally different than you thought it was. And it was just like massive downloads. And like, I think that that's the kind of vibe that we need to be chasing, is like that like passionate, cool one-on-one, like this is interesting, this is fun, this is cool. And you know, and it matters so much, you know, but like at the same time I'm not angry or like freaking out over here, you know what I mean? So I actually sort of try to channel my friend, my teacher, who I learned a lot from, and I try to bring that kind of a vibe to the teaching of Integral. And I really hope that, yeah, it gets more and more young people, and it seems to be working. I think a lot of my fans are younger, like late 20s, early 30s seems to be my main fan group. Still mostly dudes, 80%, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, I always joke that my favorite person identity group to see in integral community is young women of color. Just because like I don't know any, or even just young women in general. I mean,
Yeah.
even women, but young women too. And I'm kind of wondering first, like, how do we recruit like a more diverse audience? And I'm wondering why it tends to be so male dominated. Do you think it has something to do with Wilber's personality or the way he writes or integral theory itself, or any thoughts on that?
Well, Carol Gilligan wrote a book called In a Different Voice. And um, she's basically, what she's doing in this talk is that she's looking at the way that women think about morality and things like that. So Ken Wilber sometimes talks about that some of the tests that they would do back in the day is they would get a table of men and a table of women, and if you put a problem on the table, that the men will all immediately solve the problem and the women will just continue to talk about it, right? So men tend to think in very abstract, kind of theoretical sort of ways, almost by nature. Like if you know, like when they ask men, would you steal the medicine to save the life, you know, this is a theoretical, you know, abstraction. And they're like, well, let me think about it, you know, let's do some utilitarian math on this thing, you know. Whereas like ladies, when you ask them about this, they'll answer something like, well, did you try to go talk to the clerk and tell them what you're going through and the emergency of the situation? Like maybe you don't need to steal the medicine, maybe you could, you know. So they have like a relational kind of way of dealing with this problem. It's not so abstract and theoretical. The way a lot of ladies come to integral theory is not through philosophy, it's through psychology. Women are interested in the psychology. That's how they come to it usually. And so I think that might be the way to get more ladies involved, is to get more of the relational stuff happening, more of the community stuff happening, and maybe through the channel of philosophy, or I'm sorry, psychology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and continuing on with these kind of, you know, putting on your integral youth pastor hat, I'm wondering what you think about eventually outreaching to non-integral communities or just other communities that are out there. And one of my ideas, you know, I started the debate thing that I'm no longer moderating called Crossfire. And eventually one of my goals was to get non-integral people on there to debate topics like controversial issues with integral people. And they'll force us to not use the explicit aqua language, right? We have to translate it to the way that they can understand it and then make sense, and then
Yeah.
integrate them into a larger whole, right? You acknowledge their piece of the truth and subsume them into a larger wholeness. Do you have any thoughts on kind of outreaching to other communities, or even, what's the word, skimming off the top of people who are kind of ready for something integral, but they don't really know about it yet, or anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that you want to teach people integral who, for the most part, are pretty close and already making some of the distinctions. Um, but if you're translating, then you're probably only at most helping the person to maybe go to the next stage of wherever they're at. Like, I kind of think I've been integral for a while and been working on this whole communicating with people and skillful translation. I think it's like hopefully a skill that most of us are trying to get better at. But I've kind of developed a method of integral communication that I'm hoping to put out soon, where it's basically like levels of letting a person in deeper, and like starting with assessments and validations, as like taking your time to figure out where they're at and what they have going, right? And then if you can spend a little bit of time on assessment, and then you go, okay, well, here's basically where I see that they're coming from. They have all these ideas. Like, maybe a way to talk about it would be like, if I'm talking with someone who I don't really know that well yet, I'm going to probably let a lot of things slide that I might normally be critical of, because I want to better see where they're coming from. So if I just start like analytically nitpicking all the things that they say before I've even heard them, I'm probably going to waste time picking at surface issues and miss the deeper issues. Now, another approach is that if you want, like, a lot of what we're doing when we're working with someone like this is building trust and rapport and establishing a relationship, and that we can help them, and that we might be a wise teacher in their life or something like that. And I think maybe a way to do that is by starting, like, understanding the different possible battles that you could pick with them, and maybe starting with something easier, you know and then if you can work with them and help them on this easy thing, now you can build some trust, and maybe you can then start to work with them more on the more complicated things. So I guess what I'm saying with this is that I think even working with translation and transformation, change takes time. I don't know if it's something that you could necessarily do in just one talk, although I do like the idea, and I do think it would be a good way for us to demonstrate what skillful translation looks like to an integral community, especially if we could figure out some people who were really good at it and we got them to be the ones who did it, so that way they could really represent and demonstrate, and maybe even do like a breakdown afterwards where they're like, see, this point when I did this, this is why I did this, and this thing that happened here, that was a mistake. Like, I could, things like that, where we have like actual more breakdowns of these kinds of communications. Like, I recently had a talk with a dude named Zen, and we had a bit of a falling out afterwards. Although I think that was more because of the way that my community received what he did. Like, I sort of feel like I handled it well, and that at the end we left on good terms, but because he got criticism in the community and he felt kind of embarrassed, he sort of got upset and blocked everybody and left or whatever. But now that happened, I'm probably going to do a breakdown of our talk. And I think we should do more things like that, where we try to talk to to other people, like especially people like him who are kind of close to an integral perspective. And we could talk about what went right and what went wrong, and how we could maybe, avoid things that, problems in the future, and how we can become more skillful together, and what works and what doesn't. I think more stuff like that would be really good.
Yeah, I'm 100% on board. I love that idea, and I really look forward to collaborating with you more on how to make that happen. I kind of want to switch gears slightly and kind of talk about some of the specific content
Okay.
and about your Jordan Peterson and Sam Harrison Wilber video, which I love that. I mean, the part where you played the Jeopardy song had me like really laughing hard. That was really funny. And yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you said. But a lot of integralists, as I'm sure you're aware of, disagree with what you said. And there's a lot of people who really do think that Peterson is integral. And also, I'm not trying to pick on Peterson here, but I'm interested in this trend in the integral community where they think that a lot of these IDW guys are integral, and you pointed out that they're not. So in your opinion, where is this confusion happening? What are they not perceiving correctly?
Well, part of the problem is, like I said before, Wilbur goes into these green new age communities and he starts telling everybody, if you're hearing the sound of my voice, you're already integral. Things like that. And so then they go, oh, integral, I think I know what that means. That must be like this holistic enlightenment kind of, buffet style approach to religion that I do. That's integral, right? So for the most part, most people who talk about integral or who hang out in integral communities haven't studied the theory. They can't make the distinctions. Like if you ask them what transrational means, they think it means a non-mental state or something like that. When it's actually a translation of an experience from a stage beyond of the rational stage. So it's not but I mean, like, people are confused because they hear the language transrational. They think they know what it means. Like they think that they're talking about like the non-mental states in Buddhism. So I guess what I'm saying is I think that there's a lot of confusion in our community and not a lot of scholarship around what it really means to be integral. So they look at Jordan Peterson and they go, oh, he's including this bit of a rational standard, and he's talking about relativism, and he's got this blue idea. See, he's integral. He's got ideas from all over the place. It's like including a bunch of ideas doesn't make you integral. That makes you green. Integrating diversity with discernment is what makes a person integral. It's not just including a bunch of things, it's how you include them. It's about having the skillful methodology to be able to include things in context, understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each quadrant, things like that. Looking in the right quadrant for data, or the correct quadrant for data, I should say. Yeah, so I mean that's the main problem, is that people don't really know what integral is. They just think they do.
Yeah, kind of gets right to the heart of the issue. I know you had that piece on Sam Harris too, which I thoroughly enjoyed. I'm just wondering, just so I can kind of see how you think of integral manifesting in the mainstream public. Who are some other kind of mainstream cultural luminaries or public intellectuals who are not explicitly Wilber readers, as far as we know, who are demonstrating second tier consciousness?
Man, that's really hard. Like, there are not very many people who I could point to and be like, they're making all these distinctions. Like you get a hint of it here or there. Like when I see Sam Harris talk about the moral landscape, I'm like, holy crap, he's doing depth and span integral utilitarianism. That's awesome. That's an integral idea. Now, does he understand stages of development? Does he understand pre-trans distinctions? Not really, no. So, I mean, while I think that he's probably one of the main figures actively talking about integral ideas in an implicit way in public with one of the biggest audiences, Um, I wouldn't necessarily say that he's completely an integral thinker. I think Joseph Campbell is probably the closest person I can really think of. Um, I like Jordan, or no, I almost said I like Jordan Peterson.
Freudian slip.
I like I like Peter Joseph. They both have that PJ JP initials. That's probably what happened.
Right.
Um, I really like his ideas um, about the future systems that we're going to create together, and I think that he actually, even though he kind of focuses on the lower right quadrant, I think that he does tend to see things in all four quadrants. But again, I don't think he sees development, at least not in the way that we do, you know? So, I mean, stages are a major missing ingredient from most everybody's worldview. It's very rare that you find somebody who sees stages and who's not integral. And you sometimes see people including all four quadrants if they're really smart, but very rarely do you hear people talk about stages.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. One of the things I was thinking about too was really establishing a robust checklist of this is what it means to be integral. And one of my ideas that I would love to develop with you is a very robust checklist on these are all the things that would disqualify you as being considered integral. Because I think, as you were saying, as you explained really clearly, that a lot of people do this, adding up the individual parts. You got a little bit of green, you got a little bit of this, you got a little bit of that. Therefore, you must be integral. And I think that, but there are still certain characteristics or traits that if someone acted in a certain way or someone said these certain things, that's just patently not an integral perspective or integrally informed perspective. And if you had enough of those, it should be pretty clear that you're not integral. I think something like that we could all kind of develop together could be a helpful like metric to organize a
Yeah.
conversation so we're not all over the place, you know?
Yeah, we need both. um Again, we need like a four quadrant approach to this thing. We need to have leadership groups, we need to have support and integration systems, education and training and all that kind of stuff, and we need to have sort of open spaces for people to integralists to be able to share their stuff, and open spaces that we open up to the public where people can come in and see what we're doing. um, we need all that, but definitely I think some kind of official education type of intro material,
Mm.
that it's like with tests and stuff like that, that's made available for free.
Mm.
And it's like it will tell you where you didn't get your answers right, so that will help you learn. So I think all that stuff is important. I think we definitely need to come up with the official intro material and the official tests, and we're gonna need that stuff to be able um, to qualify integrally informed leaders as core members and stuff for some of our processes. I definitely think it would be helpful to the community to have something like that. I mean, I know that they have like the integral core classes, and you can buy those things, and they have different like levels of teaching you integral theory. Like Alyosha, my partner in the Integral Review podcast and the Integral Review Live stuff, he took those courses, and he's tried to send them to me, but they're not compatible with my computer, so I can't open them. But
Mm.
um, he's also worked on making some integral intro material in his like Slavic language or whatever. After so I mean, there's people out there making intro material, and that's cool and everything. But yeah, we probably need to step it up and get some official stuff going on. I'm actually surprised. It's been like 30 years, and like all we've been doing is like writing books and having workshops and events, and like where's the it's kind of shocking. It seems like, honestly, the only reason that there even is an integral community is because the integral community itself went online and organized itself on Facebook and started creating groups, and like we brought ourselves together. Like I don't understand what's going on with the leadership here. It seems like its priorities are not in order.
Like it's not very integral.
Not very integral.
Yeah.
Sad. It's sad and disappointing. Like, honestly, I would be glad if Ken Wilber got it all right and did it, in a way that I could feel really great about supporting and getting behind. I would much rather be his follower and supporter than to have to step up and be a leader myself. I'd rather make art, honestly. You know what I mean? But when you don't see anybody else doing it and you feel like you have a passion for it and the work needs to get done, I guess you got to step up and do it yourself, But yeah, I would probably rather not. This is a lot of work. It's a lifetime's worth of work.
Well, I'm glad that you've stepped up and done it along with your art and everything. And so it kind of leads me to my next question, which is, what do you really see in terms of like a practical, like five-year plan or goal? What are some of the big kind of next steps we need to take together as a movement to really drive forward to where we want this thing to go?
Ooh, I like that question. I like that you're putting it out like 5 years too. So I think the next steps are the Integral Emergentist Revolutionary Movement Handbook, some kind of a guide to let people understand what's happening, and to give, and the point of the long view is to give people a more nuanced way to be able to engage with the discussion around these things, like in the same way that stages of development gives us a more nuanced way to talk about things. This way we'll be able to be like, okay, I think at stage 4, I have this idea about what to do about this. What I've noticed is a lot of people end up having like their one way of thinking about it, like, oh, we need to start an integral business, or oh, we need to start an integral commune, or oh, it's about the community center or whatever. And they don't think beyond that. So I'm hoping that will give us a better way to have a more nuanced discussion about these things together. Also want to work on the Integral Hub that will come out along with that book, which is a website to bring together the integral community. And it's going to be for the whole community, not just the emergentist revolutionary people. I heard that Corey and Integral Life and stuff like that they're working on developing an integral database, and they're going to charge people to be able to have access for it. We're going to have something like that and much, much more, and we're going to make it accessible for free. So that way the integral community can connect. So that way, like, you could go on there and find out what events are going on, what merch is out there, what media there is. You could search like who's integral in your city, what integral meetups there are in your city. Then you'll be able to really plug into the integral movement. Also, there will probably be like a paid members site for like people who want to get involved in leadership and stuff like that. Maybe there will be something like dues, like $5 a month. Like, it won't be a lot. It'll be much less than the Integral Life membership. Like, the point is not to. We'll probably more like take donations and try to ask for the integral community to support the thing than we will try to charge for stuff. I just think you can hold more with your hands open than with your hands closed. So that's going to be probably the approach that we take to some of that stuff. It's more important than that the ideas get out there, that people are able to connect. Anyway, so I see those as like some of the next projects, hopefully, to come out this year. On top of that, I hope we can get some more leadership, that we'll see more local sanghas popping up on the other side of that, when people are actually able to come together, maybe then we could actually start to also get some integral businesses, maybe some more integral community centers, and maybe even be able to start to break open some kind of an integral community. I mean, if we could start to get, moving in that direction, if we could accomplish that in 5 years, that'd be great. I don't know if we can, but that would be a good goal to work towards. If we could get to that integral community place where we're starting to actually come together and build together and crack open that new world, that new integral world together, that's going to be amazing. Like, have you ever been to like a music festival that's like super green? You live out in Oregon, right? Is that what you
Yeah,
said?
I've been to one.
Okay. Man, isn't it kind of amazing, the Wii space in those places?
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's really amazing. Like, there, there's some there's some ways that it's not great, like when people are having a bad trip, or when they're like, harshing your vibe, or like, people who are, there's some red in there
Hmm.
hanging out with the green. um but for the most part, the vibe between people at music festivals is so beautiful, and they're so like nice to each other and brotherly. Like, I can't even wait to see what our integral space is going to be like when we're really living it out together in person. That's going to be amazing.
Have you thought about organizing like a live get together where we can all meet somewhere, like everyone in your community, and we can just all pick a date, like, September 30th, 2020, we're all going to meet in Boulder or the West Coast or something and just hang out and chill and meet each other?
I like that idea. Some kind of like
Grassroots integral festival or something like
big annual, yeah, that'd be great. I remember the integral community, or the integral center in Boulder, used to do something like that for the end of the year, like New Year's sort of celebration.
that.
And I really wanted to go to it. I called them and I was like, look, I'm a poor artist. I really want to come because I'm part of the community, and like, I would be glad to perform. um, Maybe we could work something out. And they're like, yeah. It was, that stuff is so expensive, like, just because you're a cognitive elite doesn't mean you're part of the economic elite.
Right, right.
I think if we do something like that, it's we really got to figure out some kind of way to make it affordable and yet still make it happen. That's really difficult, especially because we're all so spread out. I mean, like, you saw the end of that 1K video. Man, people are all over the world.
That was awesome to see that. Someone from Africa and
I know, it's amazing, beautiful. Like, do you see Sal in Ghana? Or I'm not, the African dude's from Ghana. Sal in Gaza.
oh,
Uh, the
yeah, yeah.
girl with the hijab, young, um, integral
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
lady.
That was awesome.
Yeah, dude, she is amazing. Like, I've been talking to her and stuff like that. Like, just to see how she's like been able to become integrally informed in the middle of like an open air prison and a war zone, like stuck in a fundamentalist Muslim, family and tradition, is amazing. It's like seeing a rose grow out of the concrete or something like that. It's like, wow, she's such a rare gem, man. Like, and like everyone's amazing, like, I'm so humbled by the people in my group. Like, they're all awesome. A lot of them are like pretty amazing and doing cool stuff in their own right. It's very humbling,
Mm.
which is kind of cool, because they they teach me stuff and challenge me. And um yeah, it's awesome. I feel really, really blessed and privileged to be surrounded by such smart and awesome and mature people. We got
Mm.
a really good thing going in that group too, where there's this really healthy environment with both criticism and challenge, but also support and an openness and willingness to learn in public. I love that. I have like so much respect for a person who's willing to be like, yeah, I don't know, I've thought this way for a long time, I think I might be wrong, like what do you guys think? And like being willing to admit that that you learned something in public. I think we need to praise people for that more and more, and continue to create an environment where we can support each other and be open to criticism at the same time. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, 100%. I remember Sam Harris was talking about his ideas to redesign like social media or YouTube, where there was a button called "I changed my mind," and finding ways to really valorize and acknowledge and reward and encourage people to have a moment, share their moment publicly, like, hey, I went in thinking this, and this completely changed my perspective, and
Yeah.
that needs to be celebrated.
I advocate for philosophy as a spiritual practice.
Mm.
I don't see a lot of people doing this, but I really think that engaging with people and engaging with ideas is an important spiritual practice. It ties in nicely with state training and all that kind of stuff, because you kind of have to learn to control yourself, learn to get over yourself, and be able to have compassion for the person you're talking to. We learn to think about how to respond skillfully, how to move people. But I think there's things that we can do every day, or even on Facebook, to engage people in philosophy. Like even posting something like that, like what was the last thing that you learned, or the last time you changed your mind, and inviting people to talk about that. Or here's a challenge: list 3 things you think are true and see if they stand up to criticism. And please also criticize people's ideas. Like make that into a post. I've done that a few times, and that's pretty awesome.
Mm.
Like if people know that they're putting their ideas up for criticism, they don't feel as attacked.
Mm.
And I don't know, I just feel like doing that, engaging with people more and more. People aren't so fragile. People's worldviews are pretty firm, actually. This after you've tried to shake people enough. It's hard to shake people out of their stuff. So working on practicing engaging in skillful ways, I think, is a really good practice that more of us should adopt.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Well, this has been really awesome, juicy conversation. Before we start wrapping up, is there anything else you wanted to share or that you wanted to get out there that we didn't touch on yet?
Well, I know a lot of people are going to hear my criticisms of Wilber and potentially not understand where I'm coming from with that. So I think there are 3 major ways in which he breaks his own rules. Maybe it would be good to go over them real quick before we sign off.
Sure.
So let's see. The first way that he breaks his own rules when it comes to Buddhist idealism and those kinds of ideas is he looks in the wrong quadrant for data. Like looking in your upper left quadrant and staring at your blank mind doesn't tell you the ultimate truth of reality. You got to consider that evidence in the light of all the other quadrants. Like he's even said with the Wilber-Combs matrix that our translation of any experience says more about us and about our stage of development than it does about the truth of reality. So that's one major thing, looking in the wrong quadrant for data. It's also a pre-trans fallacy. Like he's taking pre-rational dogmatic ideas as if they're trans-rationally true. And he makes this distinction pretty clear when he's talking about how he got this idea from Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell makes the distinction like there's people who think that these ideas are literally true, and there's people who understand them metaphorically. And he's not talking about I amness before the Big Bang metaphorically. He's talking about it literally. And that becomes pretty obvious and clear when you consider ideas like tetra arising, that this is really what he thinks. And then the other way is that he's qualifying the unqualifiable, right? So if our words can't even fully hold the thing in itself right in front of us, if our relative words can't hold the absolute truth of the thing in our hand, like how much more so is that the case that the map is not the territory when it comes to the absolute truth of the cosmos or the absolute truth of reality? It's so beyond anyone's ability to know or make claims about. And that's so those are some of the major issues, in case people were wondering. And I have a video about that where it's my What You Talking About Wilber series. I talk about that in part 3, and then in part 2 I talk about the consequences of that for our integration of religion when we take it to the whole. I probably should switch the order on those, but that's the order in which I made them.
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing that up again, because I actually wanted to get into that with you, but I had forgotten amongst all the other exciting ideas.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, you've been at this for, I don't know how long at this point, but how do you feel like it's in terms of assessing your own success in putting this material forth to and interacting with people, maybe changing some people's minds or saying, yeah, David, you have a really good point. I actually don't agree with Wilber after I thought about that, right? How do you think you've been successful in this effort?
To some extent. I think that people who believe based on their personal experience and who think that that's a valid way of knowing are still very, very much convinced by that. And it's really easy to just be like, oh, you're speaking very rationally, you're speaking about science, you're just an immature orange materialist, and they just dismiss you. But I think there are a lot of people who have actually become very disillusioned with Integral and Wilber over the years. And I think I'm actually getting people who have lost interest to come back. I think that's a thing. I think a lot of people who have been frustrated are starting to feel like maybe now there's an Integral that really represents them. This Integral 2.0 or like something like that. And I think a lot of people are getting excited about that. I mean, I don't know how successful I am at changing the mind of a person who is a believer in this stuff, but I feel like if you're a really serious integral philosopher and you've studied the theory, then you should understand that I'm judging him based on integral criteria. I'm holding him to his own standards. Like, I actually think Wilber gets it right. Like, he's correct in his theory and his standards. It's just his application where he gets it wrong. Or at least when it comes to like the major factors at play, and like I don't really disagree with him about much. Mm-hmm. It's almost like you could quote Wilber. Wilber says something, and then I want to be like, oh, that's really interesting. Have you heard what this guy Wilber has to say about that? So I don't know. I would like to think it's successful, but it's really hard to tell. It's really hard to tell over the internet anyways. Like, honestly, like, I was kind of shocked and taken back by all those videos that I got on that 1K. Like, I am not used to seeing everyone's faces or like knowing, like, you just put out a video and like actually the main thing you get is criticism. You like work real hard to put out a video, work on it for months, and then you put it out, and like the people who like it are like, they click like and they're like, cool video. Maybe they'll do that. But mostly you hear from the people who don't like it. So it's really hard to tell.
So when you receive a lot of criticism, especially for a video that you put a lot of thought and effort into, what is that like, and how do you like process that?
It's frustrating, to be honest with you, you know, but you also expect it, you know. I mean, I kind of expected when I put out that Wilber Harris Peterson video, I'm like, oh, everybody's going to hate me now. You know what I mean? But I actually got a lot of positive feedback from it too. So it's really hard to tell, you know. The Peterson fanboys are actually the worst, because they don't give thoughtful responses for the most part. They're just like, yeah, whatever, bucko, go clean your room or something like that. You know, they just repeat his bumper sticker catchphrases and claim you strawmanned him or didn't understand him properly. It's like, I quoted him with a video of him talking. What are you talking about? I strawmanned him. All right. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So it's frustrating. But that's part of doing philosophy, is dealing with that, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I guess the one more question on that is, I wonder if there's anything else that could be done as a next step to try to encourage a more, maybe even just an alternative style of engagement with these critics, you know. And I wonder if there's some misunderstanding that's taking place, you know. Maybe Bruce's Integral Stage could help with that, or something, you know, some platform or some way we can bridge some of these divides amongst the integral communities, so that
Yeah.
clarifications or hurt feelings or whatever could kind of be repaired.
Yeah, I think that is what Bruce is trying to do with the Integral Stage, and I think it's great. I think it's really the only place that we have right now where people with differing views are actually having reasonable conversations about what they think, um, without it descending into these personal attacks and psychoanalyzing people in place of reasonable arguments. And that's one of the really shameful things that I see a lot of people doing in our community. We include the psychological stuff, and that's really important to be able to understand all the factors of what's going on. But when someone like Frank Visser has all these criticisms about science and exterior quadrant factors, like to ignore all of his points and start saying he has shadow issues or he has this or he has that, like that's a rude and unskillful way to to talk to a person or to make a point. And I think that it's bad for the community to think that that's what an integral response to criticism is supposed to be like. I think there's a major problem in our community around this kind of stuff, and hopefully these more reasonable debates and creating some of these more virtuous and skillful integral environments and building this community will help. I actually think that groups like ERPEs and stuff like this are like the opposite of what we need to be doing. Like, they're making a virtue of being fully a dick, and I think that it's like burning bridges in our community, and really what we need, and making it seem like what it is to be an integralist is to go around acting above everyone and being a dick. And I think that's totally not the case, and that's like the opposite of what we should be doing. Maybe this isn't a good note to end on or whatever, but I definitely think that we need to start cultivating a more healthy integral community in general, and yeah, having having skillful and healthy debates and places for people to process their tensions and disagree without attacking each other is going to be really important.
That's Integral in a nutshell, folks. Don't be a dick. Well,
don't be a dick, and don't be a pussy, as Keith Witt would say. You got to stand up. You got to stand up for what you believe in too. But you can do that without being a dick.
Right. See, that's really a perfect way to end. And David, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. It's really been a pleasure to talk to you. And if you could just send me anything that any of your stuff that I can just link on the video so people can go and check out your YouTube channel or your material, I'll just put that at the on the page. So,
well, do you know how to do end screens? Do you ever do that?
No. What is that?
At the end of your video, you can put a little subscribe. If you watch any of my videos, at the end of my videos, I have like a subscribe button and a Patreon and a link to another video. So you could put a subscribe to your channel and to my channel. And if you want, you could link a video or a playlist or something over top of it as well.
Okay, I will try to figure that out.
Well, if you can't figure it out, I'll help you.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much, man. And I really look forward to talking to you some more.
Thank you, buddy. Thanks so much for your time and your good questions.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.